Sometimes for one-way ANOVA, you'll want to include a table. It's not the standard, but the nice thing about it is that you could do post hoc comparisons where you show the different pairs. And it can be helpful when you're writing your results because then you can just refer to the table. And so if you want to make a one-way ANOVA table, I'm using data from Jamovi. And this will be in 7th edition APA style. So I'm going to insert my table. I'm going to include the comparison that we have. I'm going to include the mean difference. I'm going to include the standard error, the p-value, and then I'm going to include Cohen's d. You could also include the t statistic and degrees of freedom, but I'm just going to include those for this table. So there's a little bit of flexibility on that. So I'm going to insert 5 columns. And for this analysis, this is academic self-efficacy as the dependent variable, and I'm looking at how that differs across genders, or between genders. And so I have these post hoc comparisons that were conducted using Tukey's HSD, or honestly significant difference. And I'm just going to fill in some information here. So I'll move this up. So first, I'm going to make a comparisons column. So this will be, I do not know why that's bold, but let's fix that. There we go. So this will be comparison. And then I'm going to do mean difference, which you can just do an M, and then you're going to subscript your D. So you can do command comma if you're on a Mac, or you can just go to format, text, subscript. And then we're going to do standard error. And I'm going to do a p-value and then Cohen's d. Because this gives you the important information that you're going to report. Again, you could include the t statistic and the degrees of freedom as well. I do sometimes see this with the mean difference, but then without the standard error, and then with the t and the degrees of freedom. So for comparison, I'm going to put men versus women, because that's the first group comparison. And then I'm going to do men versus non-binary, because that's the second one right here. And then I'm going to do women versus non-binary. And these can all be smaller over here. These columns are not going to take up as much space. And so I can just move these over a little bit. Actually, that was plenty. So I just want to make this big enough that these are on the same line if possible. And then you can highlight all of these together, right click, and then say distribute columns, and that will make them all the same width there. So then I'm going to report my mean difference. So my mean difference for men versus women is 2.32. I'm going to round up to 2 numbers after the decimal. Standard error is 0.84. And my p-value is 0.02. And my Cohen's d is 0.67. So I'm just rounding up to 2 numbers after the decimal, and then p-value cannot exceed 1, so that's why there's no leading 0 there. And I'm going to fill in the same information from men versus non-binary, which is this line right here. So I just did men versus women, and now I'm going to do men versus non-binary. So men versus non-binary, the mean difference is minus 1.83, and the standard error is 1.73. The p-value is 0.54. Cohen's d is negative 0.52. And then women and non-binary is this last comparison here. And so I'm going to put minus 4.14 is the mean difference. The standard error is 1.61. P-value is 0.03. And Cohen's d is minus 1.19. So now I have the important information here, and you want to center this top row. So I like to fix all this before I fix my lines. So I'm just going to center all of this. The statistical symbols need to be italicized, so not standard error, um, but we're going to italicize. Actually, I'm just kidding. All of this is going to be italicized, so I'm going to do Command I. And then we want this all to be centered as well. And you're not going to italicize the numbers. And they're a little bit off because of the negatives here. So you could move things around a little bit if you want to, but that's close enough as long as they're pretty close to the decimals being lined up. The decimals are technically supposed to be lined up in 7th edition APA. Google Docs does not have the same capability to line up the decimals that Word does, so it's not as good in that respect. So just something to think about. All right, so now I have my table and I just need to make the lines APA. So I'm going to highlight this whole table and then go to this little arrow, down arrow, and I'm going to click on all of the columns here, or columns and rows, so the whole border. And I'm going to make the border white. It's going to make it invisible. Then I'm going to highlight this top row again. And I want to click on this line that is going to be at the top of the border. And then I'm going to make that black. I'm going to do the same thing here. Click, highlight the lower border, make it black. And I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to click, highlight the lower border, and make that black. So for APA tables, you should just have the top border and then the border underneath your statistics and the border at the bottom, but you shouldn't have any vertical lines. And of course, it's going to look a little bit different if you have more, like if you have subgroups, but this table doesn't have that, so you don't need to worry about it. And then I'm going to call this table 1. That is going to be bold, so that's good. I'll leave that as bold. And I need to give it a title, so I'm going to say pairwise comparisons for academic self-efficacy by gender. And I'm going to make that not bold, and it's going to be italicized. And then this part needs to be double spaced, like that. And so we're almost done here. Let me erase those lines. There we go. This should also be the same font as whatever the rest of your paper is, which is typically going to be Times New Roman 12-point font. So just make sure that you're consistent everywhere. But that is the basic information. And then let's add a note. So I'm going to say note with a period. And then I'm going to include the overall results. So I'm going to say post hoc comparisons from Tukey's HSD. Overall model was significant. And then I'm going to report the results in APA style. So we'll report our F statistic, which will be italicized. Our degrees of freedom would be 2, 103. And then I'm going to report my F statistic, which is 6.41. Oops. And then a comma. And my p-value is quite small. P equals 0.002. You could also do less than 0.01, but I'll just say what it is, 0.002. And I'm going to report my P is going to be italicized. I'm going to report my eta squared here, my effect size. So I'm going to go to insert and symbols and equation. And then I'm going to do this superscript. And so then I just need to choose the correct symbol. So we have, there's eta and squared. So just arrow it over, excuse me. And then arrow out of this so that the font goes back to the same. And I'm going to say that that equals 0.1 1, 1. And again, that cannot, just like p-value, it cannot exceed 1. So your eta squared should not have a 0, a leading 0. Last thing, two last things, your note should be in italics, just the word note and the period. And then I'm going to double space this. So that should be double spaced. And I'm going to add a space before the paragraph there. And there you have it. So again, you can do different options for this. If you want to save yourself time in writing your paragraph, you could always include your T and your degrees of freedom and just refer to the table. So you can, list out the differences and note which are significant and just say refer to the table for details. But this is kind of a general option. So that's it. That's all I have for you right now. But you can see that this clearly shows that the groups for men versus women were significant and had a moderate effect size, that women versus non-binary was significant, and there was a large effect size. And this just demonstrates the differences.